And I just remember saying, Jesus, if this is real, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to give you everything that I am. And I'll never turn back. Like, if you are real, I'll give you everything. I'll try this out. I will read my Bible. I will pray. And that was the best decision that I've ever made in my life. From then on, my life was utterly changed.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Overcomers podcast. If you're new here, I'm Kristen, and thank you for taking time out of your day to be here. This week, we have another super great episode. We have Zachary Fraley from Iowa. He's a lead pastor of his church, and he's coming on to tell the story of being the son of addicts and what life was like to be raised by a dad who was an alcoholic and a mother as a drug addict, and then to find Jesus in college and really to turn his life around. And so I think you will find this inspirational, and grab the Kleenexes and you will enjoy this episode. If you're new here, my name is Kristen. So nice to meet you. And I am your host for these amazing stories. And as always, this podcast is self-sponsored by me, Kristen, through my business called Soul Naturals. Soul Naturals is an herbal supplement company that I became obsessed with 8 years ago, and I have this new opportunity for you to be able to try 7 of my favorite drinks for free. If you visit my website, soulnaturals.com/Kristen, click on best sellers, you'll get to try the sampler pack, which has 7 of our drinks for $14.95. And inside the package, you will get a $15 coupon code, making the samples free. And you can use that $15 coupon code on your next purchase. So hop on over there to soulnaturals.com/Kristen and click on best sellers and check out that sampler pack. And let's hop on into the episode. Today on the Overcomers podcast, we have Zachary Fraley coming to us from Iowa.
Yes.
Welcome. What an exciting state. It's like almost as exciting as Indiana.
Well, that's the funny thing. It's I always joke to people like, I've never heard of anybody excited to come to Iowa, but yet God moved in such a way where he really called us here. And so my wife and I sort of romanticized Iowa for 5 years. And I think that that's only, by God's grace that anybody could be excited about Iowa, aside from Lynn Clark.
Yeah. This is true. But you know what? Let's see, it's May. So about 6 weeks ago, actually, when you and I originally started talking about the podcast, we drove to Colorado and I drove through Iowa, and I was like, Iowa has such a bad reputation as being this boring state. And I thought it was really beautiful, actually.
Yeah. I mean, they're like rolling hills. Indiana is very flat. Here we have cornfields that are actually like rolling. So it's really nice.
Yeah. Indiana this is why I travel a lot, because there's not a whole lot in Indiana. I mean, if you go a little bit farther south, it gets a little bit prettier, but not a whole lot. Anyway, that's not what we came on here to talk about. So Zachary is coming to us from Iowa. You are the lead pastor of your church. Yeah. And we were connected through a previous guest, and she was like, you have to talk to Zachary. So here we are.
Awesome.
And you were awesome and willing and able. So glad to have you here.
Yeah, glad to be here. Like you said, I'm a pastor over here in Iowa, and I am married to a wonderful wife. I think this is our 6th year of marriage, and we have had 6 foster kids, and now we have 2 biological kids. I'm an 18-month-old and a 9-week-old. So I'm still in that sleep deprivation stage where he's starting to sleep through the night a little bit, but so we're still like learning his little idiosyncrasies and things. So and so I do pastor a church here in Iowa, and like I said earlier, I love this place and it's great. We're in the Quad Cities, and it's really cool. I worked for 5 years in DeMotte, Indiana, where there wasn't a coffee shop, and I remember crying to God, being like, "Why did you move me here? You know I love coffee."
There's no coffee shop in the entire town?
There is now. Okay. But then when I moved here, there is a wonderful craft coffee shop right across the street. And I frequent that way too much. But I feel like that was a little like wink from God saying, hey, you suffered in the desert. Now I'm going to give you an oasis. And like, I see you and your pain. So yeah, and we love it out here.
Oh my gosh. I mean, so DeMott, for you guys who are listening and you're like, what is he talking about? So DeMott's about 45 minutes away from where I live. I live in Northwest Indiana, not too far from Chicago. And DeMott's about 45 minutes farther. And so,
Like a
do they have a
little Dutch
stoplight?
town.
Do they have a stoplight
Yeah,
in
they have
town?
like one stoplight, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it is. It is a really cute town.
Yeah.
Um, but quite a few people that I went to high school with, or who wanted the more rural life, ended up out there, and that's where you were. I cannot
Yeah.
believe they did not have a coffee shop.
Well, they did, but it was really bad, and then it went under, and so then there were like 4 years of no coffee shop, and then right as I was leaving, it popped up. So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. I love coffee shops. We don't have a good one here right now, so I've been frequent. Why can't I think of that word? I've been going to
yes,
Starbucks a lot. And Starbucks is okay. So if you guys are listening and you really, really want to start a coffee shop, I would support you with my
same.
business. So anyway, why don't we start from the beginning? Tell us a little bit, like, where does your story start?
Yeah, so I was not raised in a Christian home at all. I was raised in the Bible Belt down in Texas, so eighth generation Texan, and so there were things where, so both of my parents were addicts, and so whenever something really bad would happen, they would go to church for a few weeks, and I remember going to churches, and then we would just never go again, and so really, I grew up in this transient sort of mode, where if something bad happened, they would immediately move. By the time I was in second grade, I had already been in 7 schools. So it was just very like transient, didn't really have any roots. And to top it all off, my father was a alcoholic, my mother was a drug addict, and all of the traumatic things that come out of that, were just on full display, even to the point where I had to undo a lot of hurt and trauma in my life because my go-to tendency before Christ was to, immediately, go on and move and sort of, cut people off, ghost them. And so there was a lot of work and still a lot of work that goes into me sort of undoing that. But yeah, raised by addicts and there was all of that trauma, put in together.
Yeah, and so when you say addicts, was this a continual thing? Were there moments of sobriety? Um, you know, what did life look like as little Zachary?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there were probably moments of sobriety, the honeymoon phases, where my father would get drunk and then become very abusive, to the point where, try to kill my mother and I at different points. And then afterwards he'd apologize, love bomb, and, we'd go back to it. So there were points of sobriety, but they weren't very long. And my mother wasn't actually a drug addict at that point as well. I think it was all the compounded issues that eventually led her to becoming she abused prescription drugs, but she cooked them and injected them. And she was a diabetic, so she had access to syringes and everything. So yeah, it was. I remember being like 9 years old in fourth grade, learning how to cook her oxycodone, and help her to inject it in her arm.
Oh
Like
my gosh.
you totally, you're like, people are like, oh yeah, I had a bad childhood. And I'm like, let me tell you about mine. They're like, oh my goodness. So for me, that was normal. And I don't think I realized that other kids didn't live in that life until much later on, in middle school when, eventually after all of this, my grandparents, they fought for custody of me and, really saved my sister and I. They pulled us out. I remember in fifth grade, after all of this had been going on, my mother's fifth husband at that time was in
Fifth
jail.
husband.
Yeah, she was married and divorced about like she was on her fifth time there. So
Wow.
yeah, again, like, hey, I messed up. I'm gonna move on, and I'm not gonna ever found any roots. I'm not gonna ever deal with conflict management, or and so it was the fifth husband. He had gotten jailed for selling and buying marijuana or something, and I was actually in the back seat of the car while this was going on. And so she promised me we were done, and I found out that she was, sending him letters and saying, "Nope, I'm coming back to you once you get out of jail." And it was at that time, I was like 11 years old, that I was like, "Hey, this isn't good for me. I'm going to move to Texas with my grandparents." And grandparents took me in. I always joke and say that, they gave up their like vacation era of sipping coconut drinks and like laying in hammocks to save my sister and I. And I'm so thankful that they did, because it was then that I sort of learned these, I learned new ways. I unlearned a lot of things. It's really silly, but one of the first things my grandmother ever taught me in the house was, she's like, the toilet paper goes over, not under. And
I
so
still
there's
don't know that.
oh, really? Well, I just remember it being like, oh, this is like a parameter. This is like a border in my life that I've never had before. And so like, it was just this comforting thing that you would think like, oh, toilet paper, but it was like, oh yes, I'm learning how to live civilized, and it was just this really wonderful time, but also, still dealing with the fact that, parents were addicts, father chose drinking and alcohol and other women over us. Yeah. So that was like a little brief of my like, adolescence there.
Well, yeah, and I guess I have a couple thoughts. First of all,
Yeah.
I have an 11-year-old son. So
Yes.
I'm visualizing my son Deacon. He's just finishing up 5th grade at the time of this recording. And 5th grade, and I also used to teach 5th grade. So 5th
Yeah.
grade's a really interesting year, because it's like that bridge from like I'm a little kid to I'm in middle school. I mean, there are some middle schools that do start in
Mhm.
5th grade, but most middle schools start in 6th grade. And 5th grade was a really fun year to teach, because you got to see that. You got to see that bridge. And so I'm
Yeah.
imagining you going through that time where you're having this realization of like, I'm not a little kid anymore, and I'm getting big enough now that I need to get out of here.
Mhm.
But also the amount of life experience that you had at that point, like we joke with our kid. Here's an example. Like Deacon was telling me that they were somewhere where they had to order food at a concession stand, and he had to order for some of his buddies because they didn't know how to order. Like they hadn't gotten that
Oh my
social skill
goodness.
yet.
Yeah.
And I was like, really? I'm surprised these kids don't know how to order. Maybe they were too shy or whatever it was. But you at 11, like you knew how to, do like very
Well,
illegal
yeah, horrible
things.
things. Yes. I mean, yeah, I
Yeah.
remember
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, and I guess I kind of wanted to encourage parents who are listening. You know, I'm someone who I'm a little bit ADD, ADHD, whatever. I,
yeah.
I tend to kind of bounce around a little bit. And what I have learned from interviewing people, so one of the girls I interviewed actually twice, her name is Sitinka, and she shared about a summer when the state had taken her away from her parents, and she spent that summer with her grandparents.
Mhm.
Similar-ish story. And she said the things that she learned there was like dinner was at 6 p.m. and we get up at this time, and we eat breakfast when we wake up,
Yeah.
and this is how you make your bed. This is what you use in your laundry. Like this is how you properly do laundry. And it was all
Mhm.
those like things of routine. And sometimes I think as parents, we're like, oh, it's so boring. But that routine and that structure is
Yeah.
really super healthy for kids. That they have an expectation of what's going to happen next, and they have that normalcy, and then it feels safe. And
Yeah.
you want your home to feel safe, and maybe not so spontaneous and exciting like sometimes I want it to be.
Same. Yes.
But I think that's what your grandparents taught you.
Yeah. And they gave me that safe space. And so, it was there that I was learning routine, and then I was learning, hey, we'd sit at the table and at the end of the day and we have dinner and we talk about our day, and which was really foreign to me up until this point. And so it was like this, I don't know, a breath of fresh air, because I think suddenly I felt safe where I hadn't really felt safe my whole life. And then I think also I had been thrust into this like role of adulthood from the point, I was 4 years old and my dad left us the first time, and everyone was like, "You're the man of the house." And so I was really thrust into this point of
At 4?
at adulthood at 4 is where I was the man of the house, and I took on that role. And I remember being, in 6th or 7th grade and realizing like I can trust my grandparents; they have it. And sort of like almost going through into this really immature phase, because I like could be a kid again, which I hadn't been able to for so many years. And
That
then
makes sense. You were like in survival.
oh yeah, I mean I was in survival. I was taking care of. I was raising my sister. I was her father figure for many years. I had a sister who was 4 years younger than me, and so I was taking care of her. I was, my mother was a diabetic as well. So I remember I would come home from school multiple times and she would be passed out from, she didn't really take care of herself and she'd taken too much insulin. So I'd be force feeding her a banana and Gatorade. It's like, again, for me, normal childhood, but I'm sure for other people, they're like, wow, that's a lot. Or there may be some people on the podcast who are listening and going, oh yeah, I've been there. I've done that too. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So when you went to Grandpa and Grandma's house, did sister go with you right away?
my 6th grade year was an entire custody battle for her, and that was actually, we flew into Virginia. That was where my mother was living at the time, for a court hearing to get my sister, and that was the last time I saw my mother alive. Was when I was in 6th grade, and so I saw the court pulling my sister out of her arms. And that was the last time I saw my mother alive. She would call a few times, and I was so angry. I was so hurt that I wouldn't speak to her on the phone, aside from, some really vulgar things that I said out of hurt. And I would hang it up on her. And then we got a phone call 2 years later when I was in 8th grade that my mother had passed away from drug overdose or possible suicide. And I just remember my grandmother crying, my sister weeping, and I didn't feel anything at that point. I was just, I remember it was like I couldn't feel sad or remorseful because I was so angry. There was no room for any other feeling besides anger, and we flew out for her funeral. I saw my mother, and even my grandmother told me to sing, so I sang Ave Maria at her graveside. And everybody's weeping, and I just sat down and was like, okay, when are we going to lunch?
So you're just totally numb.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't feel remorse. And it wasn't until a few years later that I remember, it hit me. I think someone said something about an orphan, and I was like, that's me. And I remember I was a sophomore in high school, I think, and I just ran into my bedroom, planted my face on the bed, and I started weeping for the first time 2 years later after my mother's death, because it actually hit me that, my mother was deceased. I didn't have that close family really anymore, aside from my grandparents and sister. And I just remember weeping for the first time. And I think like feeling all of those feelings that had been there for years prior and just came flooding out.
Yeah. I mean, you're a 5th grade boy who's coming to this realization. You spend 6th grade in a custody battle for your sister.
Yeah.
Lose your mom in 8th grade. I mean, as a mom of all of those ages, pretty much right now, like I can only imagine it's a very trying time to begin with, being in middle school, but then also dealing with all of those things. I can imagine why you just shoved it deep down and didn't want to deal with it, because it's a lot. Yeah. So where's Dad this whole time?
Yeah. So he just was sort of absent. I remember one point he came. I think I was, it was probably a teenager. He came to the front door of my grandparents' house and was like, "I'm your father." He had a son with another woman. He was like, "This is your brother." And it was like Saturday morning. I had a friend over. I think cartoons were playing, and I was like, "You are nothing more than the 23 chromosome, like part of my 23 chromosomes," and I was like, "And he's nothing to me." And I was like, "So get off my front porch and never come back again." And I like slammed the door, turned around, and my grandmom's like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah. What are we eating for breakfast?" Just like on to the next thing. Don't allow yourself to feel. Just move on. And yeah, so the father, eventually what would happen is, we did sort of rekindle, and that'll like, after I came to Christ, but, yeah, that it was, he just wasn't really present, and was also sort of in this point of building a new life with a new family.
Mm.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're a sophomore in high school, you finally start to feel, then tell us what happens after that.
Yeah, so I got kicked out of my first high school a freshman year. Went to another one sophomore year, again, like got kicked out, and so just because I was going through this just like rebellion phase. I was
Mhm.
so angry at everyone. I hated everything. No one could tell me what to do. And so, went through high school and was homeschooled for a semester. I jokingly say that I got kicked out of that one as well. Uh,
Grandma kicked you out?
Yes, but at this time, I'm realizing, like, sort of coming into this, like, I'm starting to drink, I'm starting to even smoke marijuana, I'm doing all of these things that, probably a pastor shouldn't do, in adolescence at least. And I'm doing all of these things, I'm just rebelling, I'm trying to numb any of the pain and just not think about it at all. And the fact that, I am an orphan, my mother chose, suicide, my father didn't choose me at all. And so just going through this general phase of rebellion. And then I landed up in a Christian school, so Lutheran High School of San Antonio, and it was there that they were like the only school that would take me. And it was there that I started to learn about Jesus. And so I remember, I started going to theology classes, and it was really weird. I remember my grandmother asked me how the first day went, and I was like, it was really weird. Everything was brought back to this guy named Jesus. I was like, I don't, and she had been in church. She was like, "Oh, he's the savior of the world," and I was like, "Cool." That means nothing to me at this point. And then I remember, like, there was this point in the Bible class where the teacher showed this video of like the Old Testament prophecies about Jesus, and then showed how he fulfilled them. And I remember just sitting there and it being like this moment where I was like, "Oh, this is real." And I remember going up to the teacher and saying, "Hey, I think I'm a Christian now. What do I need to do? Like, I think I'm saved." And she was like, "Well, you need a personal relationship with Jesus." I was like, "Cool. How do I get that?" She was like, "I don't know. I just know that's what you need." And
She
so,
really didn't know, huh?
yeah, I mean, it's within this sort of like Lutheran context that wasn't really focused on like, it wouldn't be like our normal evangelical sort of
Mm.
route. It was more like, hey, just grace by faith. And so I started trying to read the King James version of the Bible, didn't
Ooh,
understand that at all.
ouch.
I started attending a church that just really wasn't spirit filled, that was more, just about ritual. And my fire for God, which, I had, eventually started to burn out because I couldn't really understand how to follow Jesus. And so, I did the only thing that I knew to do. I went, I started, well, during this time, I'm still drinking, partying, having sex, all of these things that are just general, like rebellion and doing my own way, sneaking out, and then I started going to college, and I went to a Lutheran university. I started studying opera because I wanted to be a singer. I wanted to be a performer. I wanted it to all be about me. And then all of these things where I was, partying sort of half-heartedly in high school became full swing, just full blown into it, like drinking every night, to the point of vomiting, blacking out. Um, and at this point I was really following what everyone told me was the college experience, and, live your own life, do what makes you happy, live it to the fullest. You only live once. And just doing whatever I wanted, like into this totally like just full blown sinful, like everything you want to do. That's sort of what college is for some people, like this just buffet platter of everything. And
Yeah, it just like take the experience and let's do it.
exactly, right? These are the best years of your life. And I remember very vividly, like this one point where I had been drinking and I had been partying and all of this stuff. And my head laid down on my pillow, and just this moment came in where I was like, is this it? I'm doing everything that the world is telling me to do. I'm following every fleshly desire that there is. I'm not even thinking about the long term, or should I be doing this or not. And I still didn't feel satisfied. There was still this like gaping hole in my heart, and I was like, there has to be something more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my friend started attending this Christian church, and she stopped going to the parties, stopped drinking as much. She even told me God was healing her of her anxiety. She wasn't chewing on the inside of her cheek all the time, and where her thumbnail had been like bloody red because she would always hurt herself. It was healing up for the first time in her life. And I was like, this sounds really weird. Like, and I was like, but I want that, I desire that. And, are you good with the lawnmower? Okay. Yeah. And I was like, I want that. I desire that. I want that sort of, that peace that she has. And I don't know how to get that. So it was at this point where, I was invited she invited me to go to church, and I said, sure, I'll try it out. And, there the pastor started talking about Jesus and everything, and this personal relationship. And I remember driving home back to my college dorm, in my 1990 Cadillac Coupe de Ville. And I just remember saying, Jesus, if this is real, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to give you everything that I am. And I'll never turn back. Like, if you are real, I'll give you everything. I'll try this out. I will read my Bible. I will pray. And we'll see how it goes. And that was the best decision that I've ever made in my life. From then on, my life was utterly changed, from, I would say, probably the same trajectory of my parents, going down this destructive route of death and destruction, changed to where, now I have a family. I have a support unit. I have 2 wonderful, growing, healthy boys, and it's only by the grace of Jesus Christ. So
yeah. I feel like you took such a impactful story and you squashed it, and I feel like I kind of want to like pull it out and expand it a little bit. Hey guys, I know I'm in the middle of the story with Zachary, and I hope that you're enjoying it. Isn't he awesome? But real quick, before we hop back in, I just want to remind you to hop on over to soulnaturals.com/Kristen, click bestsellers, and check out that sampler pack. You won't regret it. Find 1, 2, 3, maybe even 7 drinks that you love. Included in the package is that $15 off coupon code. It's $14.95, making it free. You never know. You might find one in there that may change your life forever. All right, let's hop back into the episode. So one thing I wanted to say was I kind of went through the same experience, maybe not as drastic, but following a lot of the worldly desires of like drinking and smoking and, clothes and worldly possessions and things like that. And as I grew in my relationship with Christ, mine wasn't as immediate as yours. Mine took decades of growing closer and closer to Jesus as I kind of let go of this one thing and let Jesus fill me, and let go of another thing and let Jesus fill me. And I kind of compare it to like eating junk food, where, all the advertising and the commercials and the whatever tell you like this is the newest, greatest, whatever. When in reality, like they're just empty calories and you feel like crap. And you're like, this energy drink is just supposed to be the greatest thing ever. And you end up coming out of it and you're like, I'm actually exhausted and I'm crashing and I feel like crap. Whereas if we just ate real food, and I feel like Jesus with the Holy Spirit is the real food.
Yes.
That, like my husband and I kind of quit drinking, not like totally, but we just don't have that desire
Yeah.
anymore. And at first I was like, well, going out with our friends for dinner and not having any alcohol, would that still be fun? And then I was like, well, actually, yeah, we still have fun. Like,
Mm.
we don't even need it anymore because not that drinking's bad. I'm not saying like
Yeah.
drinking till you're passed out is bad, but
Got it. Yes.
so that was the one thing that I wanted to say. And then the second thing I wanted to ask, like, what was the time span of this? So you went from, I'm in high school and I'm getting kind of curious about who Jesus
Yeah.
is. And then I'm in college and I hit rock bottom, until I kind of had this moment. Like, at what point of college was that?
Yeah, that was like my sophomore year. So I was, it was about a 4-year time span of where I found out about Christ, but I didn't actually start following him until, 4 years later. And I think what I really learned there at that church too was, like, it wasn't just come to church on a Sunday and have the Bible read to you, but so many times the pastor would encourage, like, hey, yes, we read the Bible here, but you've got to be engaging with God like Monday through Saturday. And so it went from this like cheap 1 day a week faith to this faith that like started permeating every area of my life, even the parts that I didn't want it to. And it was like God was moving in every area. And it was so it really took about 4 years for, God to sort of, I guess, get a hold of me, or, and it was probably, through that rock bottom experience, and then also seeing my friend's life totally changed. And it wasn't like she wasn't like evangelizing to me or anything. She was just telling me about how God was changing in her life, and I saw it, and I was like, I want that. I need that. I'm hurting and I'm broken, and the world isn't satisfying me. Like, it's a junk food. It's giving me cheap calories instead of things that are going to nourish me. It took me 4 years to get to this point too. And I think, like, so many people think that it's a one and done, but I think what I've also learned with following Jesus for a while now is that it's the journey. Jesus isn't like, so many people just sort of want this escapist mentality with Jesus, where, oh yeah, just take me out, take me to heaven. But God's like, no, you're on earth for a reason, and I want to move through you in this way.
Yeah. And kind of going back to your friend, like, I think sometimes we forget that the best way to tell people about Jesus is really to show them,
Yeah.
And to build a relationship that, like, okay, I get it. There's door-to-door evangelists, and I don't know what the success rate of that is, maybe less than 1%, but most of the time the true change that happens in individuals' lives is, they become friends with a coworker, or like you with your friend in college, and
True.
you see that they're a little bit different. And I just had that happen recently with some, we were trying to figure out, we switched churches, and we were trying to figure out where we wanted to go. And all of a sudden I realized, like, this person, this person, this person, and this person, what do they all have in common? They all go to this other church. I want whatever they have.
Yeah.
Because I can see that there's just something different about their relationship with Christ and how they live life and how excited they are to tell people about Jesus. And I want to be like that. And so it's that relationship that starts everything, any kind of change. And so you saw that in your friend, and she wasn't like, being like, you better, you better learn about Jesus or you're going to go to hell, kind of a thing,
And she loved me, and she was a safe space. So she actually bought me my first Bible ever, or it was the Message translation, where I actually could understand it. And I have that same Bible on my pew, the front pew that I sit on every Sunday, just to remind me of that. And that I think it's what's most important is to share, like, the gospel through our lives and through our own experiences so many times, because that's what people like. That's what they can grasp onto. It's something real, just like you said. You saw other people, and you're like, okay, I want what they have. What's the common denominator? Okay, let's go there and let's see it for ourselves.
Yeah. And I've seen tremendous change in my faith, my husband's faith, my kids' faith, since we took that step. And that was, and like I said, and like you said, like it's an ongoing journey that
True.
like, you know, the relationship I have with Christ today is going to be even greater a year from now or 2
True.
years from now. And it just continues to grow and morph and change. And yeah, it's pretty cool. It's just like a friendship, you know?
Yes.
So you went from this kid who tried to read the KJV, which I totally get. That is a tough one. There's some historical accuracy that I appreciate in the KJV,
Yeah.
but in terms of like being able to read it. So then you went to the Message, and then somewhere along the way, you became a pastor. So fill in the gaps there for us.
Yeah. So I started, really diving into the Word of God. I started studying, like reading it front to back, and just trying to read as much as I can, because I realize like that's so important to our faith as Christians. And even while I was in a Pentecostal church at this point, who really focused on, hey, God speaks to you. I wanted to read the words of God more so than try and feel a word of God come to me, because that was tactile, that was there, and so I started reading the Bible. I moved actually like to the town where my church was. It was like 15 minutes away, but I was there all the time. I started volunteering. I became a video editor and a graphic designer because the church needed it. I didn't know how to do any of that stuff. And yeah, and then I went to my professor because I realized like I think I'm called to be a pastor, and there just been confirmation things throughout this whole journey, and I remember even just praying and God showing me this like memory when I was a kid, and I would pull all of the kids into like a room, and we would do like a Bible study. I would open it to Genesis 1, and we would never get past Genesis 1, but I'd read, in the beginning, and God created the heavens and the earth, and God like reminded me of this, and just reminded me that before the foundations of the earth, that He created me, that He even put this desire in my heart to be a teacher, and so it was like this, weeping moment there that I'm realizing my calling. And so I go to my professor. I'm like, hey, I think I'm called to be a pastor. I know I'm studying opera right now. What do I need to do? She was like, well, you can change your major, stay here for 2 to 3 more years, or you can just graduate out. I was like, get me out of here, and started volunteering at my church, just doing everything there, and just trying to like immerse myself in everything so that I could just help out. I didn't even think I was going to be a lead pastor at that point. I wanted to be a youth pastor, because at that point I just realized like I was that teenager who was hurting and who wanted to follow Christ. And I wanted to be sort of the helper to help other kids and say, hey, there is a way for you to follow Jesus. You don't have to wait until you go to college and you hit rock bottom and you've, covered yourself with scars. You can do it now and follow Christ. And so I became like a middle school, like leader pastor. The youth ministry grew. And
this was in Texas, right?
Yeah. And then eventually I realized like, I want to do this full time. So I moved to Pennsylvania to be a kids pastor there. The church was just sort of really unhealthy. The pastor was hurt, and he was hurting other people. And I remember thinking at this, there were other staff members, and I was just like, well, I left my mother, when it was unhealthy. I was like, I can leave, this job if it's unhealthy. And then I moved to a church in DeMotte, Indiana, and it was there that I saw a healthy church structure for the first time. The staff members, the lead pastor there, would come up to me. They'd say, hey, I want to let you know, what you said this other day, it offended me. Will you please forgive me for being offended at you? And also like, I want to let you know I forgive you for saying that thing. And I just remember sitting there being like, is this what healthy conflict resolution is? It was like, like, what is this? Are you trying to trap me? You're not going to go through the passive aggressive thing of like not talking to me for 2 weeks and then just talk to me. And it was there at this church that I really learned. I started unlearning a lot of my unhealthy, relationship tactics and everything. And I started to really plant roots there to the point where, I met my wife, we got married. And
is that where you met your wife?
yeah. So, Pastor John, was like, "Hey, there's this new young girl, and she wants to help out
Oh,
in youth ministry." And I was like, "Are you trying to hook me up with her?" And he was like, "No," while also shaking his head yes. So I met her. She shared her God story with me, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this girl's wonderful." So funny thing, I actually planned a meeting. So I was like, "Hey, can I get your number to add you into the group chat?" And so that's how I got her number. And I
you
slid
pulled the
in.
pastor card, huh?
Yeah, I slid into her DMs and everything. But yeah, it was at this church that I really learned like what it was to. I'd known how to be a Christian, but I think I learned how to be a healthy Christian there. Um, and yeah. Oh, I also forgot there was this one point too. This was back in college after I'd become a Christian, where I was driving, and it was one of those points where I really do feel like that God spoke to me in my heart, and he said, "Forgive your father," and and at this point I was like, okay, cool, I will forgive him, this abusive addict and everything. And it was 2 weeks later that he messaged me on Facebook and was like, "Hey, can you find it in your heart to forgive me?" And I was just
Oh
like,
my gosh.
yeah. And it was this amazing thing where I did get to sort of reconcile. We aren't on talking terms now, just unhealthy, but still there was this healing moment, and also where I chose to trust God and to say, "Hey, I'm going to follow after you, and you do say to forgive others, and so I'm going to do that." So, but yeah,
That's
so
beautiful.
yeah, I think that was also like one of these things where I said, "Jesus, I'm going to follow you with everything that I am," and it was there that I think that so many people, we can find 101 reasons not to forgive people who have hurt us. However, Christ does call us to forgive. He sat with Judas at the table. He was Peter's friend, even though he knew Peter was going to betray him. And I think like we need to follow in that as well. So
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So now you're lead pastor,
yeah.
married, two beautiful kids. How did you end up in Iowa?
Yeah, so it was after my first sort of youth summer camp thing, and I was praying. I just led, I've just preached, and there were like 12 kids that gave their life to Christ, and I just remember going out and weeping and being like, "Oh my gosh, this is all I ever wanted. I'm smack dab right in the middle of God's will," and I was like, "I could do this forever." And then I remember this like I just felt like God showed me this picture of a future church, and like, "Hey, this is going to be your church. You'll be a lead pastor at." And I went and I told my pastor's wife, I said, "Hey, this is really cool. I want to share with you." I didn't want to share with my senior pastor at this point, but she did. And he came up. He was like, "Did God tell you where your church was going to be? All this." He was like, "This is amazing. Oh my, that's so cool." And I was like, "No, I don't want to know." I was like, "What if it's in Africa or Antarctica, or like, what if I have to go back to Texas? I don't want to do that. It's too hot." And in my prayers, I kept seeing Des Moines, and so for the next like few months and stuff. And so my wife and I were like, okay, we thought we were gonna come
Didn't
to
you
the.
think it was mispronounced? Didn't you
Yeah,
mispronounce
yeah.
it though?
So I thought it was Des Moines. I was like, what is Des Moines? And then I eventually, because I kept seeing just these letters in my mind, in my heart when I was praying. And so then eventually I realized, that's in Iowa. And so for like 5 years, my wife and I romanticized Iowa. We were like, "Oh, Iowa, this is where we are called. It's going to be so amazing." And the same day that I had two interviews for two churches in Iowa for the lead pastor position, one in Des Moines, and then at noon, and this one at this church at 7 o'clock in the Quad Cities. And I met with the church in Des Moines, and it just was sort of like a little stodgy, wasn't very welcoming. And then I interviewed with this church, and they were so warm, so friendly. Um, and I told my wife, I was like, "I think we're gonna move to the Quad Cities." And she was like, "I didn't even pray for that interview, Um, like I prayed for the one in Des Moines, and it just worked out to where we came out here. Yeah, and it's been great. I just have loved it out here. We've had our two sons here, which breaks my Texan heart. I'm an 8th generation Texan, and so now that line, the lineage is broken, and I have two Iowans. And yeah, but it's amazing, and I love it out here. We've been going through 3 years of church revitalization, and it was hard. It's been really difficult, but and that could probably be another Overcomers podcast where I
What do
just
you
talk about
mean by
that.
church revitalization?
Yeah, so our church, it was full of what I would say is, like 50 and up, so an older generation church. It wasn't necessarily, um, in a healthy, thriving point. Attendance had been declining, and so they hired me and said, "Hey, will you help us to grow and to revitalize?" One person on the hiring team had said it's a re-church plant, and so I came in here to help, this church continue to grow and to has a 45-year history, and to help make sure that it continues on. And it was really difficult. There were some points where I got some hate mail, and again, like I said, that could probably be another podcast. But on the other side of 3 years, we're in this wonderful place where it's healthy. We've had baptisms for the first time in like the church's history, or like actual believer baptisms, and it's just in this really healthy place. We actually just had like our first young adults sort of small group thing last night, and it's really wonderful. And I think there's so many times too where I've talked about how it was sort of my proclivity to cut and run, and there's so many times over the past 3 years where it would have felt easier to cut and run and to just go someplace else or go to another church that is healthier, even though there is no perfect church out there. And I'm so glad that I stuck it out. We have lifelong friends here. We have community. But also more important than all of that, we're seeing Jesus Christ move in the Quad Cities, which actually the Quad Cities is actually, Barna did a study. It's it's number 15 on the most unchurched or post-church cities in the U.S. Like up there with like San Francisco, New York City. Like where we are is one of those cities. And so it's
post-church as in they grew up in the church and they left?
As in like large amount of people who do not go to church, who've never gone to church.
Oh, who've never gone to church.
Like, people who are unaffiliated with the church at all. And so it's up there on the rankings, and it's so cool that, God brought us here to help. And we we just had our group last night. And three of the people in this group have like never been to church before this. They're like, I don't know how to read a Bible. What is it, when you say Matthew, when you say Matthew 6, like where do I go for that? And so it's this really exciting place where, again, I know I'm smack dab in the middle of God's will, because He's moving in ways that aren't by our own strength or anything that we're doing, but it's just the Holy Spirit moving. And so, and I'm thankful that I didn't give in to like my previous way of cutting and running, but I stuck it through. And I want to continue to do that here, until God says something else.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that just like piqued something that was in my mind. So I had shared that we started going to a new church, and I shouldn't say new anymore because it's been almost a year, but I remember the first time we walked in there. Now, I had gone to my previous church for all of our marriage.
Yeah.
So we had been there a long, long time. So we started going to this new church. I would walk in just to where like the sanctuary was, where you would worship, and go in there. And then there was one time that I was like, I really have to go to the bathroom, but I've never gone beyond the sanctuary doors. I got to go figure out where this bathroom is. And there was no signs. And I remember that like really dawning on me that like, there's got to be other people like me who are really nervous going into a new church, and they're like, I need to go find the bathroom, but there's no signs. And we forget those simple things. So when you were talking about this person in your group that was like, I don't really know where, whatever is, like if we could take the time and to have the compassion to be like, okay, John's in the New Testament, and you're going to find it by these books, or you go to the table of contents. And of course, as a pastor, you don't always have time for that. But just meeting people where they're at,
Yes.
I think that's beautiful. And when you were talking about the revitalization of your church, it was almost like I was envisioning like a new sprout. like just like a new sprout of coming up, and just like these little buds of growth where something had been somewhat stagnant. So
Yes.
sometimes as you found out, as we were a little funny story with the waves. Could I tell that story?
Yes.
Okay. So I had gone to this this conference because I'm realizing that the Lord speaks to me often in pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he's talking, I'm seeing sprouts. But earlier I had gone to this conference, and in the conference they said, draw a picture of a word that you keep hearing.
Yeah.
And I think this was the Sunday before you and I had our first Zoom call, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yes.
so. And the word that kept coming to me was a wave. And so they gave us all a piece of paper, and I'm drawing these like pictures of waves, and the waves just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was like, what is this? Whatever. I did the assignment. I went to this conference, and I hop on a Zoom call with you. And how did we get on the topic? Remind me.
Well, I think it was even after. It was afterwards.
Oh, it was after.
You were texting me, and you said, "I feel like God is telling me, you will make waves for the kingdom of God."
Okay. Yeah.
And hold on, and then let me.
Oh, this is so great. So I was like, I don't know why God wants me to say this to him, but I had just drawn this picture, and then he texts me back.
And then my spiritual mom, actually, at a point when I wanted to cut and run from my church in Indiana, she was praying, and she felt that God had shown her, you are making waves for the kingdom of God. And so this has been in my office for probably 5 years now, 3 years here. And it was so cool because I got to share that with you and show you that, it's confirmation again. But yeah, it was really awesome.
Yeah. And my waves on my piece of paper were literally just like his, where it was just like wave after wave after wave. And it just kind of like filled the perimeter. And I was like, I don't know what this is. Like, I'm new to this, like,
Yes.
listening to God speak to me through words and pictures. And it doesn't surprise me because I've always been pretty artistic that he would do that. I feel like God meets you where you're at, right?
True.
And so as someone who's slightly artistic, he's going to speak to me in words and pictures. And for you being more musical, I'm sure he speaks to you in that way because he's just cool like that. So,
yes.
But anyway, that was a total tangent. I don't even know where we were when we started talking about that. But tell us a little bit about your hopes and dreams for the future. Like what?
Yeah. So, well, currently, I'm actually, so I'm working on a doctorate of theology. I want to sort of, in the midst of all of this, I decided to go back. I realized I needed to get a master's in order to be fully ordained. And so I went and got my MDiv, and it was totally amazing because all of my classes were about, my favorite subject, which was God. And I got to learn so much about his character. I grew so deep in my faith, and even through that. And then, and I think too, my favorite thing was that I learned ancient Christian practices that I think the church has forgotten for so long, silence and solitude and slow scripture reading. And I wanted to be able to continue to study that. So my hopes and dreams for the future are to continue to be faithful here. And then I'd love to, on the side, teach theology class to future seminary or future pastors and help them to learn about God and also, share a few of my struggles with them and maybe help make the church better. But a big thing on my heart is spiritual formation. And I want to study how you and I and the church of, how we all as Christians are formed more into the image of Jesus. 2 Corinthians 3:18 says, therefore we with unveiled faces beholding the glory of the image of the Lord are being transformed from one degree of glory to another into the image of Christ. And I want to study how we can do that because I think that is the highest call as Christians for us to be molded more into the image of Jesus for the sake of our world. And then also study Dietrich Bonhoeffer while I do that. I don't know if I talked with you about him at all, but he was a German.
No, tell me
He was
more.
a German pastor, and during World War II, who actually spoke up against Hitler, and he actually did a radio broadcast against Hitler that got shut down by the Gestapo. But he was jailed and put into a concentration camp, and then 2 weeks before his concentration camp was liberated, he was hanged for standing up and for saying, hey, the Church of Jesus Christ doesn't support what you were doing. And so he's just this amazing person, most brilliant person I've ever read. And so I want to study how he was formed basically from, childhood into what I would call sainthood. So.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. There's another person during that time. It was a woman that, I know people who are listening that they often make reference to, and that whole
Corey
time
ten
span.
Boom?
Yes.
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 I think I preached about her on Easter.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's
So she
crazy.
was, I believe, in the Netherlands, and she, amazing Jesus follower. They saved, I believe, about 900 people, because they would hide them in a sort of space behind her room, and she and her sister and her father got put into a concentration camp, and her father died immediately. Her sister and she would lead church services in their bunk room with a smuggled Bible. Her sister died, and she got released, I think, 12 days before all of the girls in her age group were actually sent to the gas chamber. And so she went around speaking to everybody about the forgiveness of God. And then one of the guards at the, I think it's Ravensbrück, the concentration camp, came up to her. This was years later, and he asked her for forgiveness. And she said, God, please help me. And she said, in that moment, she said she never felt the presence of God more than when she had forgiven him. And, just this beautiful story. So.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, that just came up. My daughter, who's a freshman, they're learning in school about refugees, and
Oh, wow.
part of that, all kinds of different refugees, and part of that is some study of the Holocaust. And what she found really interesting is we focus so much on the Jews, and of course, by large,
Yes.
was the biggest population of people who were murdered during that time. But what you don't realize is all the other groups of people who also were in concentration camps.
Oh, yes.
And I mean, all different nationalities and
Mm-hmm.
religions and beliefs. And so, yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I'm very interested to hear what you learn, because I'm just fascinated with that time
Thanks.
period as well.
Yeah.
So if there's anyone who's listening who is kind of in the spot that you were at, where, I'm curious about Jesus, I'm picking up this KJV, I can't understand what it's saying, like, what would be the encouragement that maybe they wouldn't have to spend 4 years kind of trying to figure it out? What would you say to them?
Well, I'd say get a translation that you can understand and read. The Message translation by Eugene Peterson was the one that really helped me to grow in my faith. I read the ESV now, but and I still go back to the Message. But I would say, the Word of God is living and active. It's sharper than a two-edged sword, and that's the way that God primarily speaks to us. And so get a Bible, get in a church, and then also get with someone who is further ahead than you are, and can help you walk in this journey in this Christian faith. Who's going to call you out, who's going to love you and lead you. I think that's so important. But also, I think too, so many of us want to be perfect going out of the bat. I've been doing this for 15 years or something now, maybe 14. Yes, and it's a journey. We're growing, we're learning who Christ is every day. One of my favorite theology books says, us learning about God is like wading out into the ocean. It's we're never going to be able to explore everything, but that's the wonderful thing about God, is that He wants to be known, and He makes Himself known to us. So,
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for coming on.
Having me.
Yeah, and we look forward to hearing from you again.
Yeah. Love you guys.
Right.
Have a wonderful day.
All right. Thanks, guys. See you next week.